Good evening, everybody. Whoops. We'll wait just a second for a technological change. Okay. Okay. Welcome, everybody.
Echo.
So some of you know that Town Center West has been closed for over 4 months. This is our first program in 4 months, and so we're reminding ourselves of all the things it takes to put one of these events on. So we're pretty good at it, but it's been 4 months. So anyway, my name's Kristen Fletcher. I'm the Programs and Community Engagement Manager at the Haley Public Library. And tonight we have a very special presentation, Growing Culinary Mushrooms in Southern Idaho, with Zack Wood from Ironwood Mycology. And before I introduce Zack, I wanted to mention there are 3 ways that you can enjoy our programs. You can come and in person and sit and watch and be here. You can also watch our programs live stream, and then we capture that video, do a teeny bit of editing, and post it usually within a week, sometimes less, on our website. So if there's information that you hear during this talk that you want to revisit or you didn't quite get, that's a great way to, and you can send that link to anybody. If you have somebody in Massachusetts who might want to grow mushrooms, you can send that information to your friend. I wanted to tell you about mostly 2 things that are coming up. Next Thursday at 7 o'clock, we are offering a short play reading. The play is called Patriot. It's written by local poet and playwright Les Shanahan. Patriot deals with a family whose son has turned his father into the FBI because of his involvement in the January 6th U.S. Capitol insurrection. So it's really a matter of 3 people in a family exploring a very difficult situation. One person's more on the right, one's on the left. They're trying to come to some sort of understanding of each other. So the readers include some people some of you may know: Rosemary Cody, Marilyn Babbitt, Beaver, Martha Burke, Beaver, also called Martha Burke, our mayor, Charlie Fowler, Mark Howland, and Carol Shanahan. So that's a week from today. The following day, on Friday, we've invited Dr. Charles Peterson to give a talk on the snakes of Blaine County. He is a retired professor from Idaho State University, a herpetologist. He's really an expert in snakes and amphibians, and he's going to talk about snakes, and he's going to bring with him a Great Basin rattler. And I'm trying to find a rubber boa too to kind of contrast, Great Basin rattlers and rubber boas, which are like really, really cool snakes. But he's going to be talking about the 7 snakes that are found in Blaine County. Only 1 of them is venomous, so the other 6 are not. And that should be fascinating. Also, on that same day, he and I will be installing a Snakes of Blaine County exhibit on the Mallory wall at the library, and that exhibit will be up for a couple of months until mid-December, so please join us for that. So tonight we're suggesting questions at the end, and then now it's my pleasure to introduce you to Zack Wood. Before earning his Bachelor of Science degree in Aerospace Engineering at Arizona State University, Zack grew up hunting and fishing in the Wood River Valley. Following college, he spent several years working as an aerospace engineer in Massachusetts, where he honed his expertise of mushroom identification before returning to his hometown of Richfield, Idaho in 2021. Since then, he has built an advanced indoor mushroom farm that has supplied Wood River Valley restaurants and I believe Atkinson's Market. So those gorgeous mushrooms that you see at Atkinson's Market now, look to Zack, it's his doing. So he has provided more than 5,000 pounds of culinary mushrooms over the past 2 years. So please join me in welcoming Zack Wood.
Thank you, Kristen. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for coming out. Yes, my name is Zach, and tonight we're going to be talking about some different methods that I've kind of been working on to grow mushrooms here in Southern Idaho, both indoors and outdoors. I am going to keep this, this is going to be more of like a beginner level overview, but if there's interest in kind of more advanced stuff later on too, we can make that happen as well. So yeah, let's go ahead and get into it. I'm gonna introduce myself really quick again. I'm gonna talk about what mushrooms really are, why you might be want to grow your own mushrooms. I'm gonna talk about some of the differences in the types that we can grow ourselves, and then go over some common terms you might hear as you dive more into the world of mycology, and kind of go through different types of spawn, and then our different methods of growing everything. So yeah, kind of a little outline there. Who am I? You heard who I am from Kristen, but yeah, I grew up right here in Richfield. I never really thought about mushrooms too much my whole life. I didn't even really like portobellos that much, to be honest. It wasn't until I was out in Massachusetts where there was just mushrooms growing everywhere all the time. I lived right on the border of New Hampshire and Massachusetts, right in the state forest land. And going out and seeing all these mushrooms just really fascinated me. So I bought every single book I could think of and started picking different mushrooms and figuring out what they were. And just it was really therapeutic. It was very peaceful. Especially COVID was happening during that too, so the world was kind of crazy. But by the time I moved back out here, I was bringing home maybe 15 pounds of mushrooms that I found out in the woods around my house every week, and just like putting them on like frozen pizzas and stuff like that, and whatever, stroganoff, anything. And it was really, really cool because, like I said, I never really liked portobellos, but you see all these different types of mushrooms here, and they all have different tastes and different textures, different smells, and go good with different things, right? Like the kingdom of fungi is huge. It's millions and millions of species, and so the culinary possibilities kind of are endless, really. And at any time, if anybody has like a specific question on anything, that's okay. Like we will do a Q&A at the end, but if there's anything in particular that jumps out at you, feel free to raise your hand and I can try to answer it. So what are mushrooms? Well, there's these things here that are here on the table. They are not the entire fruiting bot or the entire organism itself. Mushrooms are the reproductive organs of a fungal organism, basically. They're somewhat akin to a tomato on a vine or a fruit off of a tree, right? The fruits on a tree contain the seeds and the genetic information to can carry the tree on. Same thing with the mushrooms. The mushrooms they serve the fungus by spreading the genetic material of the fungus in what are called spores. I don't know if you've ever seen mushrooms drop spores before, but every single one of these, if you give them a little bit of time, they'll start just dropping a pretty immense amount of powder-looking like kind of substance it's called spores, and those things float around in the atmosphere. They attach themselves to different substrates, and they kind of move through this cycle of life here. And so you have your fully grown mushroom releasing a spore. The spores inoculate some type of substrate and then germinate and then form hyphae is what it's called. And then those hyphae come together and form mycelium, an expanded mycelium that is basically the roots of the mushroom, if you will. That mycelium comes together and forms hyphal knots, primordia, and then another mature fruiting body, and the cycle kind of continues. It's important to recognize, like I said, that the mushroom fruiting body is just a really small part of the organism, because the mushroom forms when the fungus has reached a point in its environment or at a point in its life where it's kind of it's like a signal that it's like, we need to now reproduce and continue the cycle along, so we're going to fruit mushrooms. And so anything that's happening in one of these blocks here is like the fungus life cycle coming to like an end within the bag here, and then they're ready to fruit after that, if that kind of makes sense. So why are we growing mushrooms? Well, they're a great food source. They're really tasty. They're really healthy. Some of them even provide medicinal benefits. One in particular here that I'll show for the camera too. This is our lion's mane mushroom right here. And lion's mane, they call it this because of the fur that's kind of growing on it. You can kind of see these icicle-like hairs. And there's been a lot of scientific studies lately that have shown that there's a compound in lion's mane that helps regrow nerve endings and nerve cells in your brain. So they're doing a lot of research on ways maybe lion's mane could have potential therapeutic uses for Alzheimer's and dementia and things like that. So tons of people these days are taking lion's mane as like a supplement, but you can also eat it fresh. And to me, it actually kind of tastes like lobster. It has like a nice like meaty texture, and I make crab cakes with it that are really, really tasty. And that's just, that's just one of them. They, like I say right here, that they're versatile and can be used as meat replacements. Like I said, the lion's mane shreds up really well. The pink oysters here, they are native to Mexico, and they kind of have a somewhat bacon-like texture and taste, actually, and make a really good meat replacement, or shred it up, or used as like a hamburger kind of thing, or pulled pork kind of. Like, it's really interesting the kind of things you can do with it, right? Like I said, each mushroom has a totally different texture and flavor profile. And so even if you don't like one, there might be another one that is pretty good that you do like, so don't just say that you've had portobellos and then think that mushrooms are bad, right? The other cool thing about mushrooms is they grow on common, inexpensive waste products. So all of these mushrooms here are growing on sawdust, and then the ones on the end here are growing on wood chips, that you'll learn a little bit more in a minute here. And you can grow them also on like cardboard though, or straw, anything fibrous and cheap like that works really, really well. And so like the inputs to, growing the mushrooms are very inexpensive from the get-go. If you do grow mushrooms in your garden, like I have done with these wine caps here, these are called wine cap mushrooms right here. I grow these outside in my garden, and we'll talk about how that happens. But what that does is that really increases your garden's biodiversity, and the mushrooms kind of, they break down more complex organic matter so that your garden can then use it in a more efficient manner as well. So it's kind of like a give and take. To have that biodiversity in your garden is a really good thing for your tomato plants and things as well. And then also mushrooms, they've been grown by humans for thousands of years, used by humans for thousands of years in different cultural contexts, for food, for teas, and different things like that. Growing them is kind of really cool. I think that it kind of connects you, to nature and to our past as humans, and can be really therapeutic. It's really awesome to watch these guys just because they grow so fast, whether it's in your garden or inside. You're just talking about a couple days where you can seriously, every single day, they're doubling in size, and it's really fun to you can almost sit and watch them grow. And the other cool thing is that they're really pretty, right? A lot of different colors. There's blue ones, there's pink ones, there's golden ones, and like I said, the possibilities are just about endless. So, the biggest question, though, that everybody asks me all the time is, can I grow morels? And unfortunately, probably not is the answer. There's some really limited kind of like trials happening at some universities over towards like in Michigan, and then in Denmark, there's some scientists working on growing morels indoors. In China, they grow some morels, like a type outdoors, but they kind of really, they don't really tell you or tell anybody their secrets, I guess is what I'll say. And so people are still really trying to crack the code with morels and other things along that line. And the reason for that is because of these two words right here. So we have these kind of crazy terms that you see, saprophytic and mycorrhizal fungi, right? Saprophytic and mycorrhizal, at least that's how I say that. So a morel is what's known as a mycorrhizal fungus. What that means basically is that morels form symbiotic relationships with the trees and the plants that they grow under. In our case out here, it's usually like Doug firs, ponderosa pines, and things like that. So what that means is that in order for them to grow and fruit, they need to be trading the right kind of nutrients and stuff with these trees and everything, right? And that can be, unfortunately, really hard to recreate in a laboratory setting. Like I said, there's a lot of people working on it, but as far as like true industrial like growing, like it hasn't really been cracked yet. That's the same for things like porcini mushrooms, chanterelle mushrooms. Those are all what are known as mycorrhizal fungi and are kind of difficult to grow. It sucks because they are some of the really good, some of the best, don't get me wrong, to eat, but for now they remain ones that you have to go find in the woods. Now the other side of that though, the ones that we can play with are the saprophytic funguses. So these are mushrooms that grow on already dead or dying trees. For example, out here in the Wood River Valley, this mushroom right here, I find these all the time. This is what's known as an aspen oyster, and it's growing on a dead cottonwood tree up Littlewood. But I find these all along the river here, growing along the Big Wood River. Like Draper Preserve over here. I've found a lot of them out there. And so they, like I said, they grow on dead trees, dying trees. So that means that we can grow them because we can put sawdust or wood chips in our garden or sawdust in bags, right? And we can make that happen. And so that's kind of like the basic, it gets a lot more complex, obviously, within like the fungal kingdom and all the different classifications and stuff. But for just the purposes of growing mushrooms, what you need to know is the difference between saprophytic and mycorrhizal fungi and kind of know from the get-go like what you're trying to grow and what you're trying to accomplish here, right? All right. So, there's a few common terms that come up whenever you're like Googling anything about this that I want to go over. And like I said, if there's any like specific questions about something, you can raise your hand and we can get into it. First, mycelium. Mycelium, like I said, it's basically the roots of the mushroom that grow throughout the ground or grow throughout trees or dead logs, anything like that. Inoculate is a word you'll hear a lot. Inoculate is what we do when we take mushroom genetic material and we put it into some type of growing medium. Like, so when I, take our starter cultures and put them into our grain bags or our fruiting blocks here. Oops, my bad. Culture is a term. You might hear a culture, which we'll get into more, but a culture is just it's an isolated fungus growing either in some type of medium that you have, whether it be a liquid medium or a solid medium, and I'll pass around some examples in a second on that one so you know a little bit more. And then spawn is another really important term. So when you talk about mushroom spawn, the most common thing you hear is grain spawn when you talk about that. But what spawn is basically just like the carrier of the mushroom, of the organism that we use to kind of transplant into our different growing mediums here. So right here, I have a fully colonized block of grain spawn. And what this is just oats, like whole oats that have been hydrated and then sterilized, and then the mushrooms have been inoculated, or has been inoculated with the mushrooms and grown throughout it. And so you can see that it's held really tightly together now by all the mycelium. But then what I will do, and I'll talk about this in a little bit later, is that when we're ready to use this grain spawn and transport it into one of our growing mediums, you're gonna break it all apart so that the grains are all separated. And that way, because it just kind of comes apart, and each one of these little oat grains becomes an inoculation point that's carrying the mushroom forward, right? And it's almost like little seeds in a way, if that makes sense. And so I'll pass that around in a second here once I get through some of these other words here. So that's grain spawn. Then there's also sawdust spawn, which is just like a bag of pure sawdust that's all colonized by the mycelium, right? And then you also have what's called plug spawn, which I don't have one here, but I'll show you a picture in a minute, that you use for inoculating logs and things. Next on our list is incubation. So incubation, just like eggs or anything like that, once we inoculate one of our growing mediums with the mushroom, it needs time to incubate and grow through everything, right? And before it's ready to fruit. And so each one of these blocks, generally, like the lion's mane here, it incubates for about 9 days in my lab before it's ready to move into our fruiting chamber and start growing into a mushroom, if that makes sense. Fruiting, you've probably heard me say it 1,000 times already. Fruiting is just, that's what we call the mushrooms growing in kind of the mushroom world, in case, you hear that. Substrate, substrate is the growing medium that, you're using, whether it's wood chips, whether it's straw, anything like that. Substrate is just kind of like that term, whatever the mushroom is growing in. And then we have two very important words, pasteurization and sterilization. So if anyone doesn't know, the difference between so I guess let me back up a little bit. With mushrooms, especially in an indoor growing setting, you need to be quite clean about things, right? We're trying to grow fungus. We only want to grow specific types of fungus. And so our laboratory functions basically as like a clean room over in Richfield. We have a lot of pasteurizing and sterilizing equipment, air filtration units, and things like that to keep everything very, very clean so we don't contaminate any of our mushroom growing blocks or anything like that. And so one of the things that you would do for that is each one of these grow blocks here are pasteurized using hot steam just to knock out most of the organisms that are growing in the block before you inoculate it with mushrooms. And then the grain bags are actually pasteurized in a pressure canner, kind of like a pressure cooker. So in the grain, like I said, it's pasteurized. Nothing's growing in the grain. It's very important that your grain spawn is very, very clean. But we're not going to get too much into like the crazy pasteurization cycles and stuff, just because that's a little bit more advanced. But just so you know, when you're talking about pasteurization, sterilization, you're just killing everything in like a given substrate so that our mushrooms can grow in it nicely, right? Supplementation is a word you'll hear a little bit. Each one of my sawdust blocks here, they're mostly made with sawdust, but they're also supplemented with some actual horse feed that like gives it a little nitrogen, a little bit of vitamins and stuff. But different people use different types of supplementations. Some people use wheat bran. Some people use soy hulls. You can use beet pulp from like the sugar beets that are around here. 'Cause anything that like adds a little bit of nitrogen to your substrate. Next is contamination, another word you'll hear a lot. That's just like when one of our blocks gets something gross in it, it kind of mess up the whole works. You don't want anything to be contaminated, right? And we'll talk more about that too. And then colonize, that's another word. Colonize is just like a word for, the mushroom organism taking over whatever substrate it's growing through. Colonization, colonize. Sorry, I just wanted to get those words out of the way just in case, and like I said, if there's any questions at some point, we can go back over them. So, first let's talk about cultures really quick. Like I said, a culture is an isolated fungal colony that's grown in a sterilized nutrient solution. Up here, what's pictured is an agar plate. I make these agar plates using dried out mashed potatoes, dextrose, and agar-agar, which is like a kind of, like a jelly kind of substance. And the mushroom you can see in the picture there, the culture growing throughout the medium there. And the plate cultures are really nice for when you're wanting to do something with like a local wild mushroom, like those wild aspen oysters that I showed on that last picture. You can take, if you have the setup and you have like a little bit of a clean space to work in, you can take a little cut off of any one of these mushrooms and put it on an agar plate, and you're cloning it basically, and it'll keep growing, and it serves as a mean to like keep your mushroom alive, if that makes sense, right? The other type of culture is liquid culture, which I get these little syringes, and I'm going to pass all these around. The liquid culture is just the mycelium suspended in a sterile sugar water solution. And this is, you can kind of almost think of these as like your sourdough starter. So I'm going to pass these around if you guys want to look at them. And you can kind of see the mycelium growing throughout those, and the mycelium of an aspen oyster growing on that plate, if you want to pass those around there. So you need a lot of like pretty complex equipment to make this kind of stuff, and I won't get too into it, but all of that is also available online. You can, there's several companies that if you Google like mushroom liquid cultures, that they sell these syringes to be able to get you started out. And then if you expand it all correctly, it'll keep living, you know what I mean, indefinitely almost. And so yes, it's, like I said, you can get those anywhere. I'll maybe talk about a couple websites that you can find them as well. So yes, so that's our spawn, or our liquid culture and stuff, if we can get that passed around. And well, I talk about spawn here. So again, spawn is what the farmer uses to transport and transplant the fungal colonies into new growing mediums. That can take the place of, or take the form of grain spawn, sawdust spawn, and plug spawn. They're kind of like your most common types. And so I'll pass around our grain spawn here a little bit, and like I said, I've kind of broken it up, and so you can kind of see. And then in the picture here is plug spawn. So you can see that plug spawn is actually just little wooden dowels that have been inoculated with mushrooms, or the mushroom culture. And I'll talk a little bit about how we can use that here in a minute. But the grain spawn, like I said, you can break it all up, and that's what I use to inoculate our fruiting blocks. And like I said too, there's also sawdust spawn, which any of your fruiting blocks is also basically sawdust spawn, right? Because the fruiting blocks are all made out of sawdust. And so if I wanted to take this chestnut fruiting block here and use the sawdust spawn for something else, I could totally do that. I could also break this one up and use it to inoculate different stuff as well. It's the same way as the grain. And we'll talk about kind of why those differences matter a little bit more here in a second. All right. So with that said, let's talk about the kind of first and easiest method. So the easiest and most foolproof method that I've been able to kind of figure out here in Idaho is just growing them right outside in my garden. I have, a pretty simple little garden plot that, we tilled up and stuff to put tomatoes and squash and things like that in, right? But there's a few types of mushrooms that do actually really well in that environment if you kind of set it up right. One of them is these wine cap mushrooms. And so if we want to maybe pass these around too, so people can kind of see these are the kind of the main ones that I'll be talking about as far as outdoor grow beds. These are wine cap mushrooms. And they, like I said, you can see in the pictures here, they're just growing right underneath my borage. And I've picked probably like 30 pounds of these guys out of my garden this year. They have a really nice mild taste. They aren't like too mushroomy, but they chop up really nice and do great in your eggs and omelets and stuff. And they're really fun to grow. So with the outdoor garden beds, like I said, the preferred species is your wine cap mushroom. However, any type of oyster mushroom will also do well in this situation as well. The biggest thing is finding a good source of wood chips. So I don't know if you guys have ever seen those like tree LLC guys driving around every spring when they're chopping all the trees for like the power lines and stuff like that. if you wave one of those guys, like no joke, if you run into one of those guys at like the gas station or something, and you say, hey, drop off your wood chips at my house, they will do it for free because it costs money otherwise for them to take it to the dump. And so if you flag down, seriously, no, if you flag one of those guys down, they will just give it to you. And so that's like the #1 place to start is get some wood chips for your garden, right? And it doesn't really matter what type, it's gonna be a big, whatever they have, it's gonna be a mix of pine and cottonwood and stuff, but that's okay. So anyways, you're gonna need a bunch of wood chips. Thank you. You're going to need one of your sawdust spawn blocks, and you want sawdust spawn, not grain spawn, because when you go to inoculate your garden, you don't want the birds and stuff to eat all of the grain spawn, right? So, and trust me, I know that because I've had it happen. And so you want your big bag of sawdust spawn, your wood chips, you want like a rake, and then like a sprinkler, but obviously it's your garden, so I hope you have like sprinkler kind of set up. So in order to make this happen, it's like I said, it's super, super simple, and the best place to start, you want to just work your garden however you intend to work it for whatever crops you're growing. And then you want to take your wood chips and just mulch about a 3 to 4 inch layer on top of your ground, on top of your garden. And then I like to just dig little trenches in the wood chips, basically, like maybe 12 or 18 inches apart, just kind of in rows, just like anything else. You dig little trenches in your wood chips down to about the level of the ground, and then you take your sawdust spawn, and same way like we did with the grain spawn, you're gonna wanna like break it all up in the bag and kind of work it loose so you can dump it out. And basically, walk along in a line, just, dumping it into your different little rows that you've created. And then one of those bags, one bag these bags are about 8 pounds of sawdust spawn. One of those bags will inoculate about a 10 to like 15 foot like square area. So it goes quite a long ways actually. But anyways, you spread your spawn into your little trenches that you've built in your garden, cover it back up, water it, and then plant your tomatoes and your squash and stuff, and then just water it, and it will blow your mind, honestly. Squash and tomatoes do really well just because they're nice and leafy. They give the mushrooms something shady, some shade to kind of grow under. But, and that's just if you're growing it like out in the sun, like, because most people's gardens are generally out in the sun, and mine has been out in the sun too, and like I said, so that's why I planted these like leafy plants to kind of give the mushrooms some shade. But if you also just had a big patch of wood chips somewhere in the shade, yes?
Are you, I see it says preferred species wine cap, secondary oyster, you can do oyster mushrooms?
Yep, you can do oyster mushrooms this way too, yes?
And when you say water, I guess that's one of the things about living here in the desert is that we don't have much water. So
yep.
you need to water it pretty regularly?
Yeah, I mean, like I water my garden about every other day or so, you know what I mean? And just because it's dry, it's Idaho, it's Southern Idaho out here. And I even live in Richfield, it's even a little drier than like up here. And so yeah, I just water it every other day or so, but it's pretty hard to mess up. Like as long as your plants look healthy and you're liking it, like whatever you've got planted in the garden, like the mushrooms should take as well. And so like all of these wine caps that are like in this picture, and all the ones that I've grown this year, I inoculated my garden in the springtime, like before I even really wanted to plant anything. I want to say March, April, yeah, it must have been May or so that I inoculated the garden. And so far, they did their first flush in right about the beginning of September, and then they're giving me their second flush now, as they really like it as it cools down. And they'll probably flush it, they're gonna flush again, most likely in the springtime again, and like when it rains and warms up a little bit. And so that's one of the cool things about doing it like this is that if you've got enough wood chips in your garden, or you're just kind of continually remulching your garden every year, the mushrooms will stay there. They will keep growing there forever and ever, basically, as long as you're doing it right. There is the only real downside to this method is that because you're sourcing wood chips from like, wherever, I've grown also other types of mushrooms in my garden that weren't wine caps. And so you need to, realize like I'm growing this specific type and know, don't just go willy-nilly. If one looks totally different, don't just assume that that's also a wine cap in your garden, right? Because different stuff will grow, it's just the nature of how it happens. But like I said, this is a really easy, foolproof method almost. And then it'll just keep on producing for you, and it's really fun, like I said, to watch these big giant mushrooms just pop up underneath your squash and tomato plants and stuff like that. Yes?
Two things. Would you repeat people's questions so we can pick it up?
Oh yeah, sorry about that.
And then my question is, would you suggest laying the sawdust or the wood chips out in your garden in the spring and inoculating it then just letting nature take its course?
Yep, that's the best way. Yes, so yes, she asked when would be the best time to lay out your wood chips and plant this? Would it be the spring? Yes, that'd probably be the best time. However, you can lay them out in the fall as well, as long as you get to it before it really freezes hard. Because these mushrooms do fine like in the winter time. Like they just, they're hunkered down basically underground. And so like I said, if you get to it before a really hard freeze, like if you did it like this week, you'd get mushrooms in the spring, I think. But I would prefer just to do it in the spring, just because that's when you're already doing all your gardening and stuff like that anyways. But yeah, I think that's really about it on those ones. Like I said, you can do this with oyster mushrooms as well. Lion's mane and such don't really do as well because they're more like growing off the side of trees kind of mushrooms. But oyster mushrooms are so vigorous that I find them growing up out of the ground, like out of tree roots and stuff in the mountains all the time. And one could even probably do the chestnut mushrooms, maybe, but I haven't tried this method with the chestnut mushrooms, just the oysters and the wine caps. But like I said, in a 10-foot area, I grew probably 40 pounds of these guys, and it was just really, really cool. So if nobody has any more questions about that particular, oh, go ahead.
Just one question.
Mm-hmm.
If you did this in the fall,
Mm-hmm.
what would your watering schedule be?
Please repeat the question.
Yes, so he asked if you did it in the fall, what would the watering schedule be? So I mean, while it was still like warm, I would be just keeping it moist every couple of days probably. But then once the snow falls, just like let it ride, and like I said, in the springtime, it would be there. Yes. All right, so on to the next here. So the next kind of step up, easiest method that we'll talk about is the totem method here. Like I said, this is like another really easy method as long as you've got your sawdust spawn, and really doesn't take too long as long as you're doing like oyster mushrooms, and especially with like cottonwood or something. So with the totems, the preferred species for these guys is any oyster mushroom, lion's mane, but you could also do shiitake and chestnuts if you want it. You could do a lot of different types this way. I've just only really seen it done with like different oyster mushrooms and lion's mane for the most part, but I think that it would work for a lot of other things. So basically, some of the things you're gonna need, again, you're gonna want your sawdust spawn. Sawdust spawn this time, you don't really want grain just because like the way you end up stacking the totems on the spawn, like the sawdust spawn just kind of packs down a little bit better and just gives it like a better contact area. So like I said, whatever mushroom you want to grow, you get your sawdust spawn from a provider, and then you're going to want some fresh hardwood logs. So these logs that you want to use, you generally want to cut, like I said, this is like a freshly dead tree that has, just been cut down and maybe has just been sitting for a couple weeks. You don't want to use really old logs that have already been colonized with all sorts of different fungus and stuff, right? Otherwise, it just won't take. You want something that's got a nice fresh starting point for your mushrooms to start. And those logs you're going to want bigger ones, 8 to 14 inches or so in diameter. I mean, you could go as big as you want, but you'll see why that's kind of like the good size here. Obviously a chainsaw to be able to cut them, or if your buddy has a chainsaw. A large trash bag and a piece of cardboard. You can see how it's like sitting on a piece of cardboard right here. And then obviously some type of just hose or sprinkler or anything. And so with the totems, like I said, pretty simple. You're just gonna cut your log into like 8 to 18 inch sections. It really doesn't matter too much. You just wanna make a nice flat cut so that it stacks well. You know, you don't want like weird diagonal cuts or anything like that. You want to basically layer the spawn between each totem stack, if that makes sense. So, you know, same thing, you take your sawdust spawn block here and you break it all apart and make it so it's all loose, and then, you know, like I said, you're just kind of gonna layer a nice like 1/2 inch or so layer in between each totem stack. Put the next one on, spawn on top, next one on, and you can go as big as you want with it. The complication is just the incubation time. So if you're doing this in the springtime and you're out just like under a tree somewhere and you've set up your totem and you've got your sawdust spawn all packed in between the different sections, you want to take a black trash bag or something and just kind of like give it a good spray down and then put a trash bag over it, cover it, you know, like put way down the bottom of the trash bag, and then just let it sit for a couple months and let it incubate. Let it all grow through. Yes?
When you're watering, are you watering layer by layer, or do you stack it all together?
No, just as long as it's a fresh log. Oh, yeah. Sorry, he asked if when we were laying it, do we water it all, like, sorry, repeat the question again.
Do you water layer by layer, or do you stack the whole totem together and do it on top?
Gotcha. Water layer by layer or stack the whole totem. I stack the whole totem as long as you have fresh wood that has like some moisture content in it. Basically stack it all up, give it a good spray down, then cover it up with your plastic trash bag. And like I said, you want to let it sit in the shade somewhere for about the summertime, and then take it off, take off the trash bag come fall, start spraying it down again every couple of days, and in the fall you'll have mushrooms growing out of it just like this. If you wanted to do this like right now, like before the winter time, you could still do it, just build the totem inside a trash bag and then just bring that trash bag all packed up into your like garage or something and let it sit in your garage in the corner where it's a little warm throughout the winter time. And then you can put it out, take it out of the trash bag come springtime, put it somewhere nice and shady, give it a little bit of a spray down, and it'll, you know, same thing will work. So that's kind of, you can do both kind of ways. I like to just set them up in spring and then let them incubate over the summer, pull it off in the fall. But like I said, you can get them going so they'll be ready to fruit in the spring using this method as well. And then the other cool thing about this method, same thing as with like your outdoor garden bed, is if your logs are pretty big, it'll keep fruiting for probably 3 to 4 years, I would imagine, maybe a little bit longer. Basically every time it rains or, you know, the weather's cool, like kind of like a spring and fall thing, like that's really what it comes down to out here in Idaho is like spring and fall, right? But yes, many years it would keep going. And once it's all colonized and the mushrooms have the log, it'll last through the winter. The snow won't hurt anything, you know what I mean? And so you won't have to move it back inside or anything at that point either. So that's a really attractive option if you've just got a chainsaw and some log rounds that you want to use up. Pretty easy way to get it done. Does anybody have any questions about this method? Yes?
So after one season and you leave it there, then do you have to put the bag over it again?
Nope. She asked, oh, no, sorry. She just asked after one season, do you have to put the bag back over it? No, you don't. The bag is really just to let the mushroom have its chance to kind of get a hold of things and keep it nice and moist while that's happening. But like I said, as long as it gets wet once a week or so after that, you know, you can set it outside in your yard and just have a little mushroom totem out there fruiting all the time. All right. So, next on our list here is the plug method for log farms. This is one that you might see more often in videos and stuff. This is like the main way that they grow shiitake in places like Japan and China and things like that. And there's also like a lot of big log farms in like the eastern United States as well. Like I said, this method here, your preferred species is going to be shiitake. It's just kind of like the main way that shiitake is actually grown commercially. However, it'll work with any saprophytic species that we've been talking about. You could do this with lion's mane, you could do it with the pink oysters, with the chestnuts. It would work with actually all of them. The downside to the log method is that it takes the longest time compared to all of these other ones. So in order to make this one happen, you're gonna want, instead of the sawdust spawn or the grain spawn, you're gonna want that plug spawn that I was telling you about. Which are the little wooden dowels that are colonized by the mushrooms. And you can find those online, or I can make them. But you can find them just about in any single species, actually. So you're going to want some of those. You're going to need your fresh hardwood logs. These ones, though, you want smaller in diameter, just so they're easier to handle. And you want them about 4 to 6 feet long. You just don't want them to be like too big, just because you're going to be moving them around and stuff like that. Next, you're going to need a drill, and just like a standard old driver drill with like a 5/16 inch drill bit. That's usually the size that the plugs come in, but you'll want to confirm that depending on what plugs you get. And then you want a hammer. And then you'll want some capping wax or sealing wax and a lighter, and that's just to seal things up at the end. Basically, and like I said, very simple. You're going to take your drill with your drill bit, and you're going to drill holes in your logs. And you can see how they're spaced about 4 inches apart here, just kind of like in a staggered diamond pattern, all the way up the whole log. Those are all plugs that have been drilled. And you start by just drilling out the whole log. And I like to do things like, assembly lines. So I'll have like a stack of logs and just drill holes in all of them first. Start with that. And then move into the next operation, which is you're going to take all your little plug spawn and your hammer and just tap them into the holes that you've drilled. They shouldn't be hard to get in there. Just tap, tap, nice and easy. Get them seated in the wood. And then you want to take your capping or sealing wax and a lighter or any type of they make like different types of applicators for that kind of thing as well. But you can just do a lighter with a chunk of wax and just drip it onto there, and that seals the moisture into each of those holes. And you want to do that on every single little hole that you drilled. And that seals the mycelium in, seals the moisture in, and allows them to kind of do their thing, I guess. And so after that, you've got the logs all inoculated, you've got your plugs tapped in there, you've got them sealed up with wax. You just stack them up somewhere, like people usually do, kind of like a house kind of stack, or you, like in this picture, they've just leaned them on like a central kind of support, and they just kind of lean them tightly packed together. But it really doesn't matter too much. You just want to lay them down in a nice shaded spot, and then just same with anything, give them a little bit of water every week or two, and let them incubate. And like I said, these ones, especially with shiitake, they aren't going to produce for about a year. Shiitake, even when I grow shiitake indoors, shiitake takes a very, very long time compared to many of the other types of mushrooms. But like I said, oyster mushrooms, anything will work with this, but you're still looking at probably like an 8-month or so incubation time, even for the oysters, just because it's a little bit, it's that harder wood that it has to work through. And it's a more natural way, I guess, of like growing in a sense. It's more like akin to how the mushrooms attack things in the wild, right? But like I said, a hugely popular method. It's been perfected across the world, especially like if you look at some of these different Japanese shiitake farms. Like they have a lot of really cool videos that you can look at where they just have acres and acres of these things all stacked up in these big forests, and it's really, really cool and interesting to look at. So anybody have any questions about that particular method? Yes, Kristen.
What do you consider a hardwood?
That's a great question. So Kristen just asked, what do I consider a hardwood? So the actual definition of hardwood, it actually comes down to like each types of wood have like different seed formations, and it doesn't actually have anything to do with how hard the wood is what I'm saying. So good hardwoods for any of these techniques or methods, honestly, some of the best is cottonwood trees. And we have tons of cottonwood out here. Cottonwood is classified as a hardwood, even though it's not technically a very hard wood. But the mushrooms all love cottonwood out here. They like aspen, but then there's also like maple, oak, hickory, walnuts, you know. The sawdust bags that I buy from Costco for these guys, they have maple, hickory, oak, and maybe one other thing. But yes, so that's what I mean generally by hardwood, so thank you for that question. All right, so those are kind of our simple, easy methods, right? Not a lot of equipment needed to do those other than just like a chainsaw and a rake for some of them. However, there is the other side of indoor growing, which gets a little bit more complicated. When you're growing stuff indoors, right, you have this sterile environment that while you think that, you know, these mushrooms, they grow out in the wild and they'd be fine in this cleaner environment, it gets a lot tougher in order to keep everything perfect for the mushrooms in an indoor environment. There's a lot of contamination issues. And then there's also just the kind of thing of humidity, airflow, CO2, things like that, right? And so with the indoor growing, I'm going to just give like an overview of how you could do it with like pre-made blocks like this. But like I said, if there's interest in a future date, I can go more into how these are actually sterilized and things like that. But for now, so for indoor growing, say you bought one of these bags from me, all you really need is just a little spray bottle or something like this, and a razor blade. Optionally, they do make these indoor fruiting tents that people buy. They're about $200. They're called Martha tents, and they're just like a little tent that you set up in your house. You have a little humidifier. It has an exhaust fan and some ducting, so you can, duct the exhaust outside of your house and stuff. And that's an option if you really want to get, into this. It makes a nice little clean little fruiting chamber in your house. I have one of them that I started with before I got really big into this. And so that's an option. But you don't even need that, honestly. You could grow any single one of these, except for maybe the shiitake, right on your kitchen countertop, actually. So any one of these little blocks here, each mushroom kind of grows in a different way. You can see that like the lion's mane here is growing out the side of the block, but the chestnuts are growing out the top of the block, right? And so you want to cut, based on what type of mushroom you're growing, is going to tell you whether you're going to want to top fruit it, side fruit it, or like with the reishi even, they grow almost entirely in the bag, actually. But in general, with any one of these blocks, you take your razor blade. Once they're colonized and ready to go, you just open up a little cut in the side and then roll down the top, and you can see that I have tape that I usually just secure the top down with. And you could set this right on your kitchen countertop, and every once in a while just mist the little hole that you made in the side with like a little spray bottle. And I have grown some pretty decent flushes of mushrooms out of these bags just right on the kitchen counter without any specialized equipment whatsoever. My dad actually took home a couple of like the lion's mane and the golden oysters to grow on his kitchen countertop without my help at all, and he was able to grow 2 pounds of mushrooms right on his kitchen just using a little tiny spray bottle. But yeah, like I said, the making of these gets a little bit more in depth. Each one of these blocks here, like I said, is made with, I buy fir pellets that you use for your pellet stove, and then I buy hardwood smoking pellets from Costco that you use for like your smoker, and I do a half and half mix of the hardwood and the fur. And I just do that because the mushrooms seem to eat the fur okay, and the fur pellets are cheaper than the hardwood pellets. And then I do a little bit of supplementation with Purina Equine Senior Horse Feed, which it just has like alfalfa and wheat bran and some like vitamins and stuff in it that the mushrooms like. It adds nitrogen to the wood and makes them grow better. And I put these blocks, after I mix them all up, I have a big 41-quart pressure canner that fits quite a lot of the grain bags in them. And I sterilize the grain bags in a pressure cooker, and that's how I make the grain. But then the fruiting blocks I actually pasteurize in a steam pasteurizer that I built that heats up a bunch of water and just kind of blasts them with steam for 18 hours. And I cook them, I pasteurize them at 200 degrees for about 18 hours to kill everything in there. The grain is pressure cooked in the pressure cooker for 3 hours at like 15 psi to sterilize everything in there. And so, like I said, suffice to say, the making of the block is pretty complicated. There's a lot of equipment that goes into it that a lot of people don't have access to. Because the other thing you need as well is you need what's called a laminar flow hood to kind of work in front of. It filters the air and gives you like a clean working space while you're inoculating all these bags so you aren't getting any gross stuff in there. But the cool thing about it is that these things do ship really well. And so like you could order a ready-to-fruit block from companies in Maine if you wanted to, and they ship it out in a couple days, put it right on your shelf, or you can order one from me and cut it right open, grow it right on your kitchen counter. And yeah, the possibilities are just kind of endless of the different types that you can do. Does anyone have any questions in general about growing indoors? Like I said, it's really hard to not just like, there's a lot that goes into it, and so I'm trying to keep it more of like an overview of the indoor side of things. Yeah?
If you have like pets at home, is it like a risk to have this little cut inside of the bag and there's like, there's always like dander and hair and stuff in the air?
So she asked if you have pets in the home, is it going to be an issue with like the dandruff and stuff in the air? No, it shouldn't be an issue too much. You know, obviously I don't let my dogs into like my fruiting chamber and lab downstairs. But once the mushrooms have gotten to this point where they've colonized this bag, they are pretty actually robust and it isn't really too much of an issue. It's that beginning stage of when they're just getting started where the contamination is like most likely to really, really hit you. Yes?
How do you know when to harvest something like a lion's mane?
Perfect question. So he asked, how do we know when to harvest? And the lion's mane, you can see how it's starting to like get a little tinge of yellow on like the top of it right now. And its hairs are all fully grown out, right? And so that's time, basically. Each one is a little bit different. With the lion's mane, you want the hairs to be nice and grown out, and like I said, that little tinge of yellow. But like the oyster mushrooms are a little bit different. These ones you'll know when to harvest when the caps start turning up. You can kind of see how they're starting to get this waviness, sort of turned upness, and so these are about ready to harvest. And then the chestnuts here, they kind of flatten out a little bit more, and they get a little bit more golden color, but you'll kind of see them flatten out. And like I said, it's kind of like a trial and error. Like you kind of just figure things out as you go through it. These shiitake here are also ready to be harvested because of the same thing. They've kind of like flattened out, and they're getting these like wavy caps here. And so I should have harvested these earlier, but I wanted them to be here to show you guys. All right, anyone else? What did I do with mine?
So will the bag grow another set of mushrooms, or is it just one and done?
Great question. So she asked if the bag will grow another set. Yes, they will. So in my fruiting chamber, I get about 3 flushes out of each of these. And like these pink oysters right here are actually on their second flush. This is the second flush. And so the first flush, I usually get about 1 pound out of them. And the second flush, I usually get about 3/4 or half a pound. And then third flush is like 1/4 to about 1/2 pound. And they start out weighing about 6.5, 7 pounds. And you can feel like by the end of the third flush, the bag is like, it's like weightless almost because they've just sucked all the nutrients and all the water and stuff out of it. Yes, any other, yes?
Do they grow out of the same hole or you cut a new hole?
Grow right out of the same hole. I just chop them right off, clean it up, nice clean cut, and then toss them right back in the fruiting chamber, and they keep on going. The shiitake are a little hard. They don't, I don't get too many extra flushes out of the shiitake just because of the way that shiitake works. You can see here that instead of cutting open a small hole, shiitake, like I said, is a weird one. Basically, the shiitake has to incubate in these bags for about 3 months before it's ready to go. Whereas, like I said, the lion's mane only incubates for 8 days. And so the shiitake sits on my shelves for a very, very long time, and then it turns this really gross, nasty brown color. So this is a shiitake block that's ready to get started fruiting right now. And with shiitake, just the way they are and how people have figured them out, you take them entirely out of the bag. Like you can see that they're fruiting from all surfaces here. And so because of that, the shiitake, they get dried out pretty fast, the block, and I don't get really too many second flushes out of the shiitake. All right. So I have a few more things here just to quick talk about. So like I said, some common issues that pop up. The biggest one that you have to worry about is contamination, especially like with the indoor growing stuff. With the outdoor growing stuff, it's not too big of a deal because you're not in a sterile environment when you're growing stuff outside. As long as you have good, strong spawn, it'll do what it should do in nature. It's when you get inside that the biggest contaminant that any mushroom grower ever runs into is called trichoderma. It's a green fungus that parasitizes other funguses or fungi, and it's a huge issue. You get a little bit of that in any of these bags, and your whole crop is gone. And trichoderma is something that's everywhere. It's always floating around in the air. It's always on the ground. It's actually really beneficial in your garden. You can buy trichoderma spores at the garden store to put in your garden, actually. But it's really bad for mushrooms. It's like the worst. When it happens, if you get a contaminated block, I have to like clean up the whole lab, toss things out. It's a mess. So any type of indoor growing situation, it's really important that you stay clean. You're always washing your hands, and you have a clean space to do stuff in. The other thing that's more relevant to like the outdoor growing though is our pests. So here, these are the kind of the 4 main pests, right? We've got fruit flies. I get the little like fruit gnat kind of thing can be pretty bad on the mushrooms. It's pretty hard to control those. I don't get them too bad outside because it's dry out here. I get a lot of slugs though growing on like the wine caps in the garden, and the slugs love to eat the mushrooms. The slugs love mushrooms. And then squirrels and deer are actually, they freaking love mushrooms, man. Squirrels and deer will eat any type of mushroom. They can even eat poisonous mushrooms that we can't eat and be fine. I often have squirrels going into my garden and stealing my wine caps, and they actually bring them and they put them in trees to like store for the winter. They like dehydrate them up in the trees, and if you're ever walking around and you'll find sometimes mushrooms just like hidden in a pine tree, and it's because a squirrel has stolen them. And then deer will eat the crap out of mushrooms if you are somewhere where you've got some deer coming in. I've actually seen guys out east bait whitetail deer by building a wine cap bed where they wanted to hunt their whitetail, where they had their stand set up actually. So just a thought. Just one more thing I wanted to bring up. When you're growing indoors, especially if you go really intense and you're going to get one of these Martha tents and you're going to I'm going to get my own indoor growing tent. The biggest thing that you'll want to think about when you go to do that is ventilation, okay? Because you're growing it in your house. And if you're going to be growing a lot of mushrooms in your wooden house, and those mushrooms are going to be putting out a lot of spores that are going to want to attack wood, you don't want to grow mushrooms in the rafters of your house, you know what I mean? And so if you were to buy one of these indoor growing tents, you want to absolutely make sure that it is vented outside, because I've seen some real horror stories on the internet of people not doing that correctly and causing a huge big mess. And that just popped in my head. But But yeah, otherwise, you know, with when it comes to mushrooms in general, the biggest thing is they like it humid, they like fresh air, and they like it not too hot. And that's kind of like the biggest thing to think about, whether you're growing them outside or you're trying to grow one of these blocks in your house. You know, I tell people, like, if you're just going to take home one of these lion's mane blocks, do it right on your kitchen counter because there's a lot of fresh air. You don't want to just shove it in a closet somewhere where there's not a lot of oxygen for it to breathe or anything, right? And yeah, and just think about humidity and moisture levels, and it's just like growing almost anything else. So everything that I know and have talked to you guys about today basically came from these two books. I have them over on that table if you want to look at them. But Growing Gourmet and Medicinal Mushrooms by Paul Stamets is like the Bible of mushroom growing. He goes over almost every single species you can imagine. It tells you exactly how to do every setup, even build your own laboratory if you wanted to. I have diverged a little bit from some of his stuff, just you know, through experience, but it's an absolutely great starting point. And then Mushrooms Demystified by David Aurora is more of a taxonomical kind of, you know, more like identification and just mushroom mycology in general, I guess. But a lot of really good information in these two books that I highly recommend picking up. They're big, but they're awesome. Yeah, and then here's just some like cool pictures. So like here's some, so these are aspen oysters that I found at the golf course in Ketchum, like right off the highway. They were growing in like a pile of wood chips right out of the ground. So I took those home, and then I cloned them onto that agar plate that I was passing around, and then I grew them inside. And so this is what they look like when they've been grown indoors versus grown outdoors, because, and I can think that, I think they almost get a suntan, you know what I mean? The ones outside, they get darker, and they're more like, even a little bit tougher, whereas the ones that were grown indoors were like more delicate and just like hadn't been touched by the sun at all, you know? And I do use lights in my fruiting chamber. It's not dark. I use like a soft blue light in my fruiting chamber because mushrooms, they like to see the light to know where it grows, and it helps with their coloring as well. But I thought that was, I really love this like kind of, because like I said, any of these wild species that are just growing on wood, like you could clone them and grow them indoors if you wanted to. Then I've got, yeah, these are some of the biggest blue oysters I've ever grown here. You can see my big fillet knife right next to them. They're like massive, a couple of pounds each here. Cool lion's mane, but I managed to have a lion's mane today. And then these were my wine caps this morning in my garden before I came here. I took this picture today, this afternoon, of a giant batch of wine caps that has just erupted underneath my squash plant right here. And like I said, this was the second flush this year. They were inoculated this spring, and pounds and pounds of these guys grown everywhere. All right, well, that is my presentation, but we have time, I think, still for questions. So anything at all. Like I said, if I didn't dive too deep into the world of building these blocks, because it's like I said, it kind of takes a lot of specialized equipment. But if there's anything, you guys, any questions at all?
So when you were talking about the totem poles and you were speaking of different, like you can get up to 3 flushes usually out of the bag. You were talking about the live wood and the, I think, mycorrhizal, is that right? Versus the
Saprophytic and mycorrhizal, yep.
So the mycorrhizal love the nutrients from freshly dead wood, right?
So he's asking about the, I guess the difference a little bit again in between mycorrhizal and the saprophytic. So you've got them flipped a little bit. It's the saprophytic ones are the ones that like the dead wood, and it's all of these ones that you see here are saprophytic. The mycorrhizal ones are the ones that form symbiotic relationships with trees, and so those are the ones that I can't really grow at this point in time, like morels and things like that. Yeah. Yes. Absolutely. No, thank you. All right. Anyone else? And if you guys want to come up here and look and pick my brain about any of these different displays I've got up here, if you want to take one of them home, I don't know,
Before that happens, I just want to thank you, Zack, for a really outstanding talk. That was really excellent.
Thank you.
And I've been talking to Zack about possibly having 2 classes in the spring. One, a class like this to identify native, locally grown mushrooms, followed by a field trip a short time later, whenever it's a good time, to go out and find them and identify them, so in the field. So keep your eyes open for that. Again, Zack gave us a tremendous amount of information tonight. We've captured it on video. It'll be posted to our website, so that if there were parts of it you wanted to revisit or just hear how those plugs worked.
Oh yeah, and if anyone wants this presentation too, I can take your email and email it to you as well. So, yeah.
There we go. So I'll turn the lights up in this room, and like Zack said, you're welcome to come and take a look at these amazing fruiting bodies.
Yes.
So thanks again.